Mr. Speaker, I don't like being rude from the bench, but it was very difficult not to laugh when our Deputy Prime Minister said that free market capitalism works. For example, America. Mr. Speaker, the global financial crisis was caused by deregulation. The global financial crisis was caused because of free market economics. But then she went on to say that poor people in the United States are happier than poor people in socialist states. And at that point, I actually did laugh, Mr. Speaker. It was hard to contain the laughter. When someone in Cuba who is poor and needs life-saving surgery can access that surgery, but a poor person in the United States cannot access that surgery because they are poor, she tells you that their total happiness is increased because they have equality of opportunity and equality of liberty, Mr. Speaker. That is absurd, and that is the craziness that the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister brought you, that Gemma told you was crazy. I'm going to look at 4 things in the speech. Firstly, I'm going to look at the philosophical debate about whether government intervention is good at all and whether government intervention actually provides for, 1, increased happiness in each individual and increased happiness for all individuals, because we actually win both of those on our side of the house because they made it really easy for us. Secondly, I'm going to analyse minority rights and how minorities in particular are incredibly important. And even if we fucked over the majority on your side of the house, we're happy to do that because minorities are incredibly important. You don't provide for minority rights at all. And thirdly, I'm going to look at free market capitalism a little bit more, but mostly in a mocking sense. And finally, I'm going to look at why the government is better at making decisions about spending and national policy than individuals. So, the philosophical debate. The opening government said the following: we don't know what happiness is. Okay? Then they said, the maximum happiness is provided to each individual when there is no government intervention. If you do not know what happiness is, how is happiness no government intervention? You are making things up on that side of the house. But let's assume the first thing didn't happen and you said that you could quantify what maximum happiness was and it was no government intervention. Let's look at our position and how that is much more nuanced and we'll win this debate. Firstly, we told you right from Gemma's speech that most people are happier and most people need government intervention. Like, we cannot get inside the head of every single individual, but logic dictates that almost everyone requires government intervention and quite a lot of it. Firstly, most people, like the vast majority, probably 90-something% of the population, cannot guarantee they will never fall on hard times and probably will at some point in their life. We don't think they're happy when they cannot be guaranteed welfare under your side of the house, cannot get that welfare at the point at which they fall on hard times, cannot provide for themselves, cannot provide for their children. If that is your concept of happiness, no welfare or such a minimal welfare like the welfare that's provided in the United States, your side is ridiculous. Secondly, if you're a minority group in the under your side of the house, for example, if you are disabled under your side of the house and cannot afford a wheelchair or cannot provide to make your own ramp to use that wheelchair, the problem on your side of the house is that you said, well, you have an equality of opportunity to create a business and then make the money to build that wheelchair. That does not make you happy when you do not have that, or the ability to do that if you are not smart, for example, or don't have that ability in the long term. How is that happiness, guys? That is absurd for your side of the house to talk about. But then they said, you don't want your taxes to be used for something like public transport, to take an example from the Prime Minister, because that public transport may or may not make you happy. It's subjective, we don't know. Firstly, public transport benefits in an empirical sense the majority of the population. It makes them happy because they can get from point A to point B. But putting that aside, even if it only benefits a few people, and the majority of people don't ever take public transport or don't ever rely on welfare, it actually makes everybody else happier when other individuals have welfare because they don't have to steal, for example, Mr. Speaker. They can actually have a safer society. Government intervention makes people happier in a qualitative sense and a quantitative sense that is ridiculous from your side. What we said right from Gemma's speech is that most individuals will be happier and are happier in an interventionist government society. They set the bar very low because they wanted so little government that we didn't necessarily have to go all the way to Scandinavia to prove that the government works. But we're happy to support that on our side of the house. More government equals more happiness. Okay, yeah.
Well, if I manage to advance due to my talent alone, unless you provide me to pay for tools to others who aren't that talented, you're irrelevant for this debate.
Okay, number one, even if you're really talented and can provide everything for yourself, number one, you want a safe society where other people are on welfare and don't have to steal shit. And secondly, the majority of people aren't that talented, guys. The majority of people cannot start a business people on your side of the house will be unhappy. At the very best conception of what you guys provide is to provide like 10 guys in the United States who look like Warren Buffett a little bit more happiness. That is absurd, but you probably don't even achieve that because they'll live in an unsafe society. Second issue in this debate, minority rights. They said two things. Firstly, with respect to the benefits to the poor, she told you that poor people in the US are happier than poor people in welfare states. What? Poor people in the US who don't have homes, don't have food, don't have the ability to provide for their families or healthcare are happier than poor people in Scandinavia or Cuba? That is empirically untrue, and every happiness index will tell you that, and logic will tell you that, guys, because they have a likelihood of dying that is greater. That is the problem. Then she told you that the reason that they know that is true is because people flock to the United States and they don't flock to Cuba. The reason that they do that is because they've been lied about the fact that capitalism works, and they're actually wrong, they should flock to Cuba. Secondly and finally on this issue, she told us that with respect to people who aren't poor, why should they care about poor people? Why should they think about poor people and care about them at all? Number one, because it's moral, and number two, because your community will be safer. Even if it weren't true that those things exist, we think the government should provide the most, and Gemma told you this from the start of her speech, the most amount of welfare, the most amount of resources, the most vulnerable people in the population, because they face structural disadvantages because of racism, because of history. That means they cannot achieve the equality of opportunity that that side wanted to support. Thirdly, free market capitalism. All they told you with respect to why it should happen is it works. Opportunities make it work. We said from the start that we wanted equality of opportunity, we want to allow everyone rights, but in the instances where you faced those structural barriers, we would intervene, we would give you scholarships if you were Indigenous and all that sort of stuff, but with respect to everyone else, we would provide welfare as well. Finally, we think the government is better at making choices about spending, making choices about national policy than individuals that they think can make all these choices. Because they have more data, they have more information, they have long-term decision-making capabilities that individuals do not and are notoriously bad at exercising. Mr. Speaker, at the end of this debate, all the opening government said was sometimes government intervention and taxation make you a bit sad. Mr. Speaker, most people, in fact everyone, needs the government to intervene to make them happy, and even if it weren't true, poor people in particular need that intervention. The motion falls.